Hello. So I've been asked the question, is there a biological basis for depression? My stance on this is very much in the camp of saying no. But let's be clear. When we're talking about any emotion, whether it's extreme sadness, happiness, lust, anger, whatever it happens to be, or even the lack of an emotion, which is what depression is. Literally speaking, it's depressed, as in pushed down. It's the root of the word, and it's a numbness. Depression is not sadness. Depression is not grieving. And people get this confused. There are a lot of psychological terms that are misused in common parlance, and it builds up an incorrect model of how psychology works. And I've even heard doctors using terms incorrectly. Quite recently had an argument with a doctor about psychopaths and sociopaths, and she was pontificating the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. I said, look, just because one research paper that you read by that particular psychiatrist, he's giving you his idea of what's going on. And in psychology, there are as many different models of the mind as there are people who propose models of the mind, because these things are not testable. In the same way that in normal medicine, these things are testable and observable. They're not in psychology. There is no physical test for depression. We can't take a blood sample from you and find strains of the depression virus in there. So you've got to remember, with all of these things, with all of these mental illnesses, it takes place within consciousness, and that is a very hazy realm that is hard to pin down. It's mercurial. It moves. The more you try and grab hold of it, the more it shoots away from you. You've also got to remember that psychiatry is a modern branch of psychology, and psychology is a branch of philosophy. It's actually a branch of philosophy. Now, I'm all for being rational and following the Western scientific method. We should endeavour to be as scientific as possible, but that does not make psychology a science, and as much as it aspires to be, it can't be a science in the way that physics is. And the more you try and make it that, the dumber it gets. Seriously, most academic psychology is tedious because they're trying to be a proper science. Okay, so to be clear, all your emotions are rooted in the body, and all of your emotions are rooted in the brain, and even a lack of emotion is rooted in the body and the brain. But the question here is, the implicit question, is if you say, is there a biological root for depression? Well, yes, because you're a biological entity and it's occurring, this phenomena, as it's described, this social construct, this word, depression, is occurring within you, and you're a biological entity. So yeah, there's a biological root from that point of view. But that's where it ends. To then make the leap to, there is an anomaly within your brain, within the meat of what you are, within the brain matter, or somewhere in the hormonal system, things have gotten out of whack and therefore you're depressed, is not provable, and there is zero scientific evidence to support that. Don't believe me, I could just be some crazy conspiracy theorist, right? Blaming everything on the government, corporations and big pharmaceutical companies. Go and do your own research. There is no biological test for depression. There's no biological test for any mental disease, mental health issue. And in fact, I've just used the word disease, but of course they're not diseases. They're not diseases in the sense that you have diseases of the body, and it's a mistake to apply this Western medical model of the body to the mind. It doesn't work. The way I always see consciousness, and the catch-22 of consciousness, is you're using human consciousness to study human consciousness, and that's a problem. It's a really big problem. It's like taking a torch beam and trying to get the torch beam to shine back on itself. Consciousness is great when it's directed in a certain direction, but it's hard to direct it back on itself. And the only way to do it successfully, really, is through introspection, is through meditation. All of Freud's revelations, or the major ones, came through a combination of introspection and then working with clients. He was big on introspection. Scientists hate introspection, as well they should, because you're going inside of yourself and you're saying, this is my subjective experience, this is what I think. I think there's such a thing as the Oedipus complex, as a child's desire to to have sex with his own mother, to sexually attach feelings to his own mother, and to destroy his father as a sexual competitor. Freud went inside and discovered that in himself, and then he, built that theory based on introspection. So there is no scientific evidence that supports the idea that there is what is usually referred to as a chemical imbalance, air quotes, chemical imbalance in the brain that needs resolving with medicine. There's no evidence for that. There can't be. There's no blood test for schizophrenia. There's no blood test for narcissistic personality disorder. There's no blood test for any of these things. And you've also got to remember that these things in psychiatry are voted on. The existence of a mental illness is voted on. Borderline personality disorder, manic depression, bipolar disorder, they were voted on. Again, this is not conspiracy theory, this is fact. You can go and look it up. I can give you the links and you can see people are voting on this. When the DSM is released, I think every 4 years, psychiatrists vote on which illnesses stay in and which go out. This month, September, we're focusing on narcissism, and narcissism is not in the latest edition of the DSM. They took it out, but nail biting is in. A whole stream of other mental illnesses are in there. And you've got to ask the question, why? Why was narcissism taken out? Why are all these other illnesses in there now? So where does that leave us? Well, if there's no biological or scientific test that can prove that depression is an anomaly or a chemical imbalance in the system, why take medicine to deal with it? So it gets a little bit more complicated than that, all right? Because what happens is, if you consistently think a thought and you consistently behave in a certain way, your body does actually produce chemicals or ceases to produce chemicals, and it does actually create a biological environment that will support certain emotions. For example, when people train more, when they watch more comedy, when they do things in their life that they find enjoyable, when they go out in nature and take long walks, if they have pets that they love. These are all things that have been tested by psychological experimentation. The research is out there. If they're goal orientated, if they're making progress in their life, then they are happier. And then they're producing, without wanting to get into the biochemistry of it, happy chemicals, more inside of their bodies. People with depression are not doing that. They're not producing as much. There is no endorphin production, there's less endorphin production, there's less serotonin production. So then you can say, well look, there's the chemical imbalance, there's the problem. So the issue then is to say, well okay, but what are we talking about here? Are we talking about genetic determinism? Are we saying that genetically you're prone to schizophrenia, you're prone to depression? And people then use horribly, this is not science to do this, they use anecdotal evidence. They'll say, I have schizophrenia in my family. I have depression in my family. I have anxiety in my family. And my response to that is, yes, humans are very good at learning. Yes, children learn from adults. Yes, if your parents had a psychosis, you have that psychosis. I have a fear of roller coasters. I have a fear of turbulence on flights. Guess what? Both my parents had that. These are learnt behaviours. There's no gene for fear of roller coasters. It's a ridiculous idea, and it shows. If you look at the research into this, you will be terrified by the ignorance of the mental health professionals. It's scary. The way they talk about genetic determinism is very old-fashioned. It's like 60, 70, 80 years out of date. Even their understanding of genetics is out of date. But nobody's telling them, nobody's disciplining them, nobody's stopping them. They just carry on. Yes, you're genetically predisposed to schizophrenia. On what research? On what evidence? Well, your mother had it. So I learned the pattern of crazy from my mum. I learned the pattern of whatever it, or the flip mode. The flip side of it is, if you had parents who had very good coping strategies for dealing with reality, if your parents were cheerful, upbeat, if major, not just your parents, but major role models in your life when you were growing up did a certain thing, you're likely to do it too. These are unconscious patterns, because this is how animals learn. At the deepest levels, we watch what role models do, and we internalize all that very, very quickly with no conscious checking of what's going on. So if they drank and smoked a lot, you're more likely to drink and smoke a lot as well. If they were super healthy and fit and competitive, you're more likely to be that way as well. So you get all the good stuff and all the bad stuff. But to say that it's genetic shows a lack of understanding of the latest research into genetics. So then we come to the issue that a lot of people will be asking, because there's a lot of people on antidepressants, is, are you saying I don't have an illness? Are you trying to devalidate me? Are you one of these people who's basically saying I'm lazy or I just can't take control of my life? No. Are you saying I shouldn't be on antidepressants? Yes. But I'm not saying drop them now, because once you're on them, they're such powerful drugs that if you stop taking them straight away, the effect can be devastating. So you have to find a way of stop taking them that works for you over time, and you should do that with medical supervision. You should say, I want to stop taking these. What's the recommended way of scaling down my dosage so I don't need them anymore? Am I trying to take something away from you? No. The effect of deeply held emotion, or the lack of emotion, the numbness of emotion that depression is a real phenomena. I'm not taking that away from you. You do have a problem. And this kind of mental suffering can be absolutely hellish. But to take the drugs that you're taking, just so you know, because your doctor didn't tell you this, the drugs that you're taking are the drugs that have been most effectively sold and marketed to the doctors, to the medical community. And the drugs that you're taking have what they call a shotgun approach. So there's a whole cloud of symptoms, and there are various different drugs within that drug that they fire at that cloud of symptoms, and then they just see what sticks. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. That's what you're taking when you're taking antidepressants, which is why I say you should come off them. Do you have a real problem? Yes, you do. If you have social anxiety, if you have depression, if you have tendencies that look like what is usually described as bipolar disorder is another thing, is another issue for another day. But I think it's dangerous and disempowering to believe that these things are it's just a chemical imbalance. There's nothing I can do about it. I have to take drugs. You and I and everybody as a sovereign human being should exhaust every other possibility first before taking any drugs for anything. I'm big on not taking painkillers. I'm big on not taking drugs unless I absolutely fucking well have to. And so should you be, because it disempowers you. You're relying on external help. All drugs. You know, people say to me about, I take the piss out of all my friends who smoke weed because it's weakness. I know it's cool to say nowadays, it's hip, it's in. Let's say weed is good. Let's talk about how awesome weed is. It's weakness. Alcohol is weakness. Coffee is weakness. It's all just fucking weakness. You don't need it. You don't need any of this stuff. And if you need it regularly, something is wrong in your life. When somebody comes to me and they're chronically depressed and they can't break out of what that emotional state is, why would I assume that they have some biologically created virus, some chemical imbalance? This is the complexity of it. There is a biological imbalance, but the biological imbalance of the brain chemistry is not something that's just randomly occurring to you like a bolt from the blue. I always say it's in your environment. Maybe you're sad. Oh, I'm experiencing depression. Oh, okay, you have an illness, you're depressed. Take this pill. That's to me, that's the most horrendous violence. It's violence against the individual. That is like saying, okay, there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's fuck all wrong with you. Maybe you're not happy. Maybe there's something wrong in your environment. Do the doctors even ask you? What's your relationship like with your boyfriend? What's your relationship like with your girlfriend, your wife? Is she mean to you? Are you getting the sex that you need and that you want? Again, you know, when I talk to my friends, they'll often take the piss out of me because I take a very Freudian, very Reichian view of things. There is a drive to life. There is a life drive, and that's manifested sexually. People who are not sexually fulfilled are miserable. In the same way that, like, if you have a big dog, if you've ever had a big dog, right, and you've ever looked after them, you should watch Cesar Millan, and you don't take it for a run every day. What does it do? It chews the fucking furniture, it acts badly, it barks incessantly, it will develop obsessive compulsive disorder. Have we learned nothing from the animals? Have we learned nothing from our pets? When the dog gets obsessive compulsive disorder, starts chewing the couch, starts being aggressive and grumpy and cranky, why do we say, oh, this dog has a behavioural issue? No, the dog hasn't been run today. If you have, I love dogs, but I won't go off on one. Say if you have Rottweilers, Dalmatians, Alsatians, Spaniels, any dog that is bred to hunt needs to be run vigorously every day for 1 to 2 hours. If you want a well-behaved dog, just exhaust the fucker, just tire it out, and it will come home and it will chill out and it will be fine. It's the same thing to me with sexual energy, or the same thing with any energy that people need. If it's not expressed somehow, they'll be unhappy and they'll be sad. So here we move into another element, which is a little unusual. One of the major causes of depression that I think that hasn't really been discussed is suppressed rage. If you're not sexually fulfilled, you'll end up depressed. If you're not expressing yourself properly, you'll end up depressed. If you don't assert yourself, you'll end up depressed. But particularly anger. Anger is now a social taboo. I think all of this stuff to do with depression, antidepressants, the whole psychiatric industry, yes, I will sound like a conspiracy theorist. If the tinfoil hats, I'll wear it. It's all about social control. Why are you being told that there's something wrong with you? Maybe there's something wrong with society. Maybe, on some primal level, you're aware that you're being jibbed. You're aware that you're being ripped off. Your life isn't fun. It's not enjoyable. You didn't choose this. We're given the illusion of choice. Oh, you can exchange your pebbles that you got working at the fucking mill for a few trinkets and a few seconds of happiness. We'll let you buy alcohol so you can get smashed out of your mind. We'll let drugs illegally flow through the country so that every weekend you can go out and maybe snort some badly cut cocaine, maybe take a few pills, take some ecstasy and get a little cheap, dirty high for a few hours and then feel like shit for the next 2 days. Why would you need to do that? Why would any normal, healthy, balanced human being who's enjoying their life feel the compulsion to do those things? And when people do those things, if you go out to towns and cities and watch people in clubs, do they look happy to you? Is that what happiness is? I see anger. I see sadness. I see crowds full of people trying to escape a shitty reality that they fucking hate. And it's saddening, it's depressing. I was a doorman for years, on and off for 10 years. And my most recent stint in London of doing door work, I just stand there and watch these people and say, all I see is misery. These people look not just not happy, but miserable to me. Everybody is miserable. And they're trying to escape that misery. And especially when you see the young kids who get into it, and they don't even know why. There isn't a thought between their ears of clarity. So they come to the clubs and they get fucked up. And then they drink. And then they fight. And then they have sex with people. And then they get each other pregnant. And they have kids that they don't want. And the cycle's repeated. It's a mess out there. If you're depressed, it might be because you're intelligent. If you're depressed, it might be because you're a decent human being who looks at the horror of what this world has become and feels sad. Maybe you should feel sad. Maybe we shouldn't stigmatize sadness. But depression is more than sadness. Depression is grief and anger and sadness that has actually been suppressed. So if you were told in your environment, you have no right to be angry, you have no right to sadness, you have no right to your grief, just fucking harden up, will you? Oh, shut up, stop being such a fucking baby, pull yourself together. And you go, okay, well maybe they're right, maybe I am weak, maybe it's that. Depression will come. You suppress anger, depression will come. Anger, like sex, is a drive. It's a drive to life. There's nothing wrong with anger, there's nothing wrong with aggression, it's a healthy thing. If it's allowed to be expressed and channeled and causes you to take action. Back in the day, when we were hunter-gatherers living on the plains of the savannas, tattooed and naked, as Terence McKenna would say, tattooed and naked. What was the purpose of anger? Why do you get angry when you're hungry? Because your body is starting to die. Your body needs to motivate you to action. Why do you get grumpy when you're hungry? Why? Because your body is saying, come on, eat, go and fucking find something. Because you might have to kill something. You might have to do something brave to eat food. So you need that aggression. Where does it go now? Well, in the modern world, there's food everywhere. It just happens to be shit. It just happens to be poisonous. It just happens to be garbage. But I tell you this, if you're taking antidepressants and then every weekend going out and getting smashed, going out and snorting cheap coke and, taking all kinds of other drugs and eating junk food and not training and all the rest of it, you're not helping yourself. You're not showing yourself any kind of love. You're not giving yourself any kind of real, true respect. you're not developing and cultivating your serenity as an individual. The world is sick. The world is sick. You're not sick. Well, you might be sick because you've ingested the poison of the world, but the world is a sick environment. If you're mentally feeling unbalanced, I would say that's a natural, normal human response to what's out there. This is not how humans are supposed to live. We're not free. We're slaves, and we're the children of slaves. We're the children of children of children of slaves. I think the last people who experienced any kind of freedom came before the Industrial Revolution. So you move from the big issue from the smaller issue to the bigger issues. But this is what's not being discussed, is what is depression? Well, maybe depression is a rational response to a fucked up world. Maybe you should be depressed because you're angry, you're sad, you're not, and it tends to be the sensitives, it tends to be the more intelligent, it tends to be the people who are questioning reality and going, hey, hang on a second, maybe this isn't the way it should be. Or it could just be that you're being ripped off. If your work is making you miserable and you feel like a cog in a machine, guess what? Humans aren't meant to be cogs in a machine. That's not what we're designed for, that's not what we evolved to be. If you're in a relationship where you're being treated like crap, and you're not sexually fulfilled and the other person is using you and abusing you and psychologically, physically, whatever, then yes, you'll feel depressed. If you lost somebody and you didn't grieve for them, then you'll feel depressed. If somebody is upsetting you and you're angry with them and you don't at least say it, your more primal part of you will want to pick up a rock and bash their head in. We can't do that, that's not acceptable, but you should at least be able to shout and scream and swear at them. That's why I get angry when people tell me to not swear. Stop being a medium of social control. They're just fucking words. And I am angry, and I am pissed off, and I will fucking swear, and if you don't like it, fuck off. Because if you start controlling people's words, you can start controlling their thoughts, and if you start controlling their thoughts, you can start controlling their feelings. And that's where depression comes from, it's the suppression of feelings. So the final thing I want to talk about, which kind of goes back on what I just said, is, do I always see a chemical solution to an emotional problem as wrong or bad? No. There are situations where, we've developed chemicals. We talk about what's natural and what's not natural. As Joe Rogan pointed out, if humans do it, it's natural. The distinction should be between organic and inorganic. That was Joe Rogan. It's pretty smart, that. And I see, therefore, that the fact that we developed and we evolved to be able to have chemicals means, yeah, okay, they can be used sometimes. If I see somebody having an absolute hysterical screaming fit, if you've ever seen somebody have a hysterical breakdown, there are times when you think, okay, this person should have a chemical solution. This person's not slept properly for 3 or 4 weeks and now they're freaking out, and you go, well, let's look at all the natural things that are occurring. If you're really hungry, really tired, and then dealing with an emotional trauma, yes, you'll have a breakdown. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That means you're a biological entity who has needs, who's under a lot of pressure, that will eventually break. That's just the way of the world, that's how it is. There's no moral reflection of who you are as a person. So when somebody's having a hysterical breakdown, yes, at that point I would say, give them something that calms them down. Give them something that allows them to sleep, at least. Get that sleep, start to recover, give them some food, give them some, whatever it is. And the other side of it is with depression, there have been experiments and there has been research done that shows that with people who are just so stuck in their depression, it's hard to get them out of it. As if you give them MDMA, if you give them ecstasy, then they can have a very strong experience of what joy and what happiness is. It's completely artificially induced. But by having that re-experiencing of joy and happiness, it reminds the brain and reminds the body, this is what it is to be happy. That would then need to be followed up with, better lifestyle management, life coaching, counselling. Let's give you counselling and therapy that deals with the crap in your past, all your unconscious blocks that stop you from being happy, and then let's look at coaching you to move forward into the future and to develop better habits of behaviour that support you in being healthy. And it's boring stuff that people don't want to do, like put down the Big Mac, stop drinking Coca-Cola, start eating more fruit, start eating more veg, you will feel better. You don't have to go to the gym and mash the gym up for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, but you should get outside and go for a walk and breathe in some fresh air if you can. And move your body wants to move, you'll be happier, I promise you. So it's a complicated issue, it's more rooted in issues of society and culture and where we're up to. But I mean, if you look at Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, he predicted this, the state that we're in now. George Orwell and Aldous Huxley are two sides of the same coin, with 1984 and Brave New World. In one of them, in 1984, people are suppressed through aggression, violence, torture, fear. And in the other one, Brave New World, people are suppressed through pleasure. People are suppressed through being made to be petty, silly, addicted to cheap thrills and stimulation. And if anybody felt any sadness or any anger, they would be immediately given a pill called Soma. And I think the root of Soma is to sleep. So the pill puts you back into that. It's like taking the blue pill in the Matrix. I deliberately want pleasure. I deliberately want to go back to sleep and not deal with these uncomfortable feelings, whilst not realizing the whole time they're completely enslaved and being used. So my advice to you is, if you're on antidepressants, is to find a way to start coming off them. Let's look at what got you onto them in the first place, without assuming that there is something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. If you're depressed, I've been doing this for 10 years, actually more like 15 years now, and I've never had a client or seen a situation or read of a case study where I was genuinely convinced that the person just had some genetic disorder that made them depressed. There are genetic disorders that affect behaviour for sure, but depression ain't one of them. So yeah, try and get some therapy, try and get some help, look at why you're depressed. Maybe your lifestyle is depressing. I'm very much of the Zimbardo school of thought, which is that environments create personalities. Genetics don't create personalities. Genetics determine eye colour. Genetics determine, hair distribution and, hair colour, eye colour, height, that kind of thing. But that genetics aren't really there to determine such fluffy things as personality. I don't think your genes care one way or another whether you're happy or not. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that I could give you that suggests that your genes don't give a shit whether you're happy or not, as long as you don't kill yourself. I've subscribed to the Richard Dawkins view that basically the genes are selfish, and we're there to keep the genetic flow going. And if you look at silly behaviours like how people act during breakups and heartache, that supports the idea that basically your genes are bullies inside of you that don't care about your happiness, they just want you to procreate. That's why you can get stuck on a former partner who's an absolute dickhead. Your genes don't care whether they're a dickhead. My genes don't care if my ex-girlfriend's a dickhead. My genes just go, but she's healthy, she's strong, she's good looking. That means the children will be healthy, strong and good looking. She won't die during childbirth, she'll look after them, and the kids will be strong, and your children, your genes will carry on. So go and get back with her, and your body will push you towards doing that. But we'll discuss that on another day, perhaps. A lot of people who are depressed as a result of heartache and as a result of unexpressed grief from losing a partner. But these are things that you can get help with. I can help you with them. If you want to get Skype coaching with me to discuss any of these things, I'm more than happy to do that. But this thing with antidepressants, if you're on them, you do have to be very, very careful in how you come off them. And you do need to seek medical advice in doing that as to the dosage that you have to taper it off. But a lot of times these things, you're being told there's something wrong with you, and that's what I resent. That's why I don't subscribe to that model, is because I don't believe there's anything wrong with the individual, but I think there's a hell of a lot wrong with society and with culture as it stands today. So we're kind of, the narcissistic abuser in this situation is the powers that be. The narcissistic abuser in this situation is the big corporations and the pharmaceutical companies that I was talking about before, that I said I wasn't going to talk about. They're like the narcissistic parental abuser. They don't care about your happiness. They just want you to shut the fuck up and go back to work. That's what giving somebody an antidepressant pill is. Oh, there's something wrong with you? Oh, poor baby, fucking have some... Oh, such an act of aggression. How devaluing of you is that? You come to me and say, oh, I feel sad. I go, sad? Nobody feels sad, you puff. Here, take some fucking drugs. Go back to work. They'll numb out those feelings. So that's why I don't subscribe to that model. And I will always lean towards the model of saying no to genetic determinism. But obviously sometimes genetics are determining behavioural factors. They have to. I'm not denying that. But on this case, there is no science that backs up the notion that depression is rooted in some biochemical, genetically determined fault with you. And all the evidence points to, environments creating people. So if you're depressed, you probably live in a depressing environment. Now that could be, I don't mean literally just the physical environment, as in, if you live in a city, you're more prone to depression, but you are, the research backs that up. It's also your family environment, your emotional environment, your psychological environment. And whenever I've worked with people over the years, and I talk it through with them, within the first hour, I can identify 4 or 5 things that they're doing regularly that will lead to them being depressed, that they're not even aware of. People are ignorant of this stuff. The billboards that are out there when you go and drive around your town and city don't say to you, stop drinking Coca-Cola and drink some water. Dehydration can lead to depression. Oh really? I didn't fucking know that. Yeah, and also if you're over-caffeinated and full of sugar, your immune system goes down. So you're less able to fight diseases. Then you feel weak and sick all the time because you're picking up every virus in the environment. You can never shake that cold. You're one of those people. I've had a cold for 3 weeks. Nobody should have a cold for 3 fucking weeks. That's not how the body works. These billboards are not saying to you, hey, maybe you should go outside every once in a while, get some sun on your skin, because that's what humans are evolved for. We need the vitamin D. You need to get in direct sunlight regularly. Otherwise, what happens? Do you know? What happens if you don't get sunlight? Well, tell me. Come on, tell me then. You don't sleep. You get insomnia. Because your body is not going, oh, this is the daytime. The body's dumb. This dumb piece of flesh. It's very intelligent and intricate in certain ways, but in other ways it's very easy to trick. If it's not getting direct sunlight on it, then it doesn't know, oh, this is daytime. Oh, this is the daytime. And when should humans sleep? In the night time. So everything becomes day and night. You're under artificial lighting all the time, breathing in air-conditioned air all the time. You will start to get insomnia. What does insomnia lead to? Tiredness and an inability to cope. What does that lead to? Shitty effects and shitty results in your life where you can't cope anymore. And then what happens? Well, then you feel like a piece of shit and then you get depressed. So, I'm big on personal responsibility, but I'm also big on pointing out the truth, which is that we live in a culture and we live in a society that is clearly trying to make us stupid, that is clearly trying to make us more dependent, more obedient, weaker, sicker, more easy to sell to. Everything is a sales pitch nowadays. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you should watch The Century of the Self. There's a documentary on YouTube, which I'll link to here. And you should watch There is a Policeman Inside of Our Heads and It Must Be Destroyed. That's another good one. It's all about social control. So if you're feeling depressed, know that lots of people are nowadays. Depression levels are spiking, even as our consumer culture reaches its peak. There are more things now than ever before, but people spend more time online than ever before, and they want to talk to each other by poking each other on Facebook. So your relationship becomes a symbolic relationship, not with another human being, but with a bunch of fucking glowing pixels. That in and of itself alone is fucking depressing. But it's profitable. If we do what will make us happy, which is just get together and see each other face to face and have a chat once a week and just go, oh, this is what I experienced, and then you have a support group that goes, oh yeah, that's pretty fucked up, dude. Maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. Sometimes just the act of talking and being listened to. That's why group therapy works. That's why the talk therapy, as it's somewhat dismissively called by the medical community, the talking therapy, that's why it works. Because that's natural, that's human, an interaction. Except this isn't an interaction, I'm just glowing pixels. Oh God, the horror never ends. So if you want help, I can offer it. I offer counselling and coaching sessions via Skype. Just drop me an email or post a comment or PM me via YouTube and we can set that up. Depression, as awful as depression can feel like when you're experiencing it, actually is not one of the harder things to get people through. I'm not going to say it's easy, but there are much harder things to get people through than depression. Depression can usually be resolved in essence inside of about 2 to 3 weeks. If you've got a good coach or a good therapist, they can help you through it. Okay guys, that's enough for today. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. If you've got any questions or comments, then you can post them below or you can email me. and I'll speak to you soon.